from George Ivanovich Gurdjieff's All and Everything. Chapter 40, Reading 4. Beelzebub tells how people learned and again forgot about the fundamental cosmic law of Heptaparaparshinokh. If one does not consider that insignificant number of three-brained beings of certain small groups who existed on the continent Asia, and who instinctively sensed the hidden meaning of this Chinese division of whole sound into 7 definite centers of gravity, and reproduced it practically, exclusively, only during such being manifestations of theirs as they considered sacred, then one may boldly say that in the presences of almost all three-brained beings who arose on this planet of yours during recent centuries, the data for the cognizance of the altitude of thought and meaning put into this subdivision have already entirely ceased to be crystallized. But the contemporary three-brained beings there who breed on this same continent Asia, as well as on all other terra firma of the surface of this planet of yours, having already lost every kind of instinctive feeling, all without exception use it for the satisfaction of only certain of their low purposes, unbecoming to three-brained beings. What is most interesting, however, of all the history related by me concerning the cognizance of the sacred law of Heptaparaparshinokh by three-brained beings who bred on your planet, and which concerns chiefly the contemporary beings, is that although a great number of all kinds of totalities of special information, or as they themselves express it, separate branches of scientific knowledge, again arose among them at the present time, and began by them, so to say, to be learned by rote, yet concerning the law of vibrations, which branch is the most important, and which gives the possibility, though approximately, of recognizing reality, there is among them absolutely nothing, if of course one does not reckon that celebrated what is called theory of sound, which arose comparatively recently, and which is seriously studied, and as it were known by their contemporary, as they are called, learned physicists and learned musicians. In order that you may, so to say, illuminatingly project the essence of your contemporary favorites, and in view of the fact that the causes of the arising of various misunderstandings, widely spread among certain of your favorites, in the sphere of this branch of knowledge there, are very characteristic and might serve you as excellent material in general for the representation and valuation of the sense and objective significance of all other contemporary, separate, independent branches of their what is called exact science. I consider it necessary to explain to you in greater detail which theories concerning the vibrations of sound are studied and, as it were, are known by these mentioned contemporary, terrestrial, sorry scientists. But before speaking about this, my essence again enjoins the whole of my common presence to express my sincere condolence on the fate of all contemporary terrestrial three-brained beings who, thanks to their persevering, being part dog duty, peculiar to them, finally attain to the state of that degree of reason when it becomes inevitable for them to have in their presences also the data of the genuine information relating to the law of vibrations. About this, I, by association at the present moment, remember with the impulse of regret, because at the period of my last sojourn among them, I happened more than once to meet those three-brained beings there, who, according to their state of, so to say, psychic perfection, ought of necessity to absorb and transmute in themselves just the true information concerning the law of vibrations. And at the same time, I clearly understand that they could not extract such information from anywhere. There is indeed among them at the present time such a totality of information, or as they themselves name it, a theory of vibrations, yet the mentioned unfortunate contemporary beings who are in need of this information cannot, in spite of their wishes and efforts, obtain anything tolerably satisfactory for their searchings, except various misconceptions and contradictions. And so, my boy, the basis for the arising of such terrestrial misunderstandings was that various fragments of information concerning the law of vibrations reached the contemporary beings from two independent sources, namely from those same ancient Chinese and from those ancient Greeks, about whom, you remember, I have already told you that their community was formed there long ago between the continents of Asia and Europe by those Asiatic fishermen who, out of boredom during bad weather, invented various sciences, among which was just this science of the vibrations of sound. And this science of theirs later also passed from generation to generation, reached your contemporary favorites almost simultaneously with the said Chinese science. All subsequent misunderstandings began with this, that in the information which had reached them from the ancient Chinese, it was shown that the whole octave of vibrations has 7 ristorials. That is to say, that the octave consists of 7 gravity center sounds, while in the Greek information it was said that the whole octave of vibrations has 5 ristorials. That is to say, that the octave consists of 5 centers of gravity, or 5 whole notes. And so, only in consequence of the fact that in the presences of your favorites of recent centuries, the functioning of every kind of data for being logical reflection crystallized in them began to proceed almost, as it is said there, topsy-turvy, and as both of these entirely differently sourced informations which reached them appeared to them, according to their bobtailed logical mentation, equally plausible, then those beings of contemporary civilization who began in a new fashion to bake like pancakes all kinds of separate independent branches of their illustrious science, having fallen during several years into a state of what is called troubled perplexity, could not in any way whatsoever decide which of these two contradictory theories to prefer, and which of them to accept and include in the number of branches of their official science. After a great deal of, as they still sometimes say, drying of saliva, they finally decided, in order that no one should be offended, and at the same time in order to have also this branch in their science, to unite into one both of these theories which had reached them from ancient times, and which had nothing in common with each other. And a little later, when one of them, named Gurdjieff, thought out a very long mathematical explanation of this misunderstanding, namely, why in one theory there is mentioned the division of the octave into 7 whole sounds, while in the other into only 5 whole sounds, and why and how such an important contradiction had occurred, then these mathematical explanations of his entirely pacified all the corresponding representatives of contemporary civilization, so that now, with a quiet conscience, they produce all their wiseacring concerning vibrations on the basis of the mathematical explanations of this obliging Gurdjieff. In these mathematical explanations, the following considerations were adduced. Now, that is to say, this same obliging Gurdjieff, in a certain way known to himself, calculated the number of vibrations of all the Chinese 7 whole notes, and began to explain that in the Chinese 7-toned octave, those whole notes called mi and si are not whole notes at all, but only half notes, since the number of vibrations which they have almost coincides with the number of vibrations of those Greek half notes, which according to the division of the Greek octave are found just between the Chinese whole notes re and fa, and between si and do. He made the further supposition that it was obviously convenient for the Chinese to have the ristorial of the voice, that is, the center of gravity of the voice, also on these half notes, and therefore they divided their octave not into 5 whole notes like the Greeks, but into 7, and so on in this way. After this explanation of Mr. Gurdjieff, As I've already told you, all the other contemporary scientists of new formation were completely pacified, having stuck a label also on this branch of their official science. And now among them, this branch under the name of the theory of the law of vibrations exists there, as our wise teacher Mullah Nasir ad-Din would say, in clover. About the given case I still remember, and willy-nilly cannot help expressing aloud that wise formulation of our always esteemed Mullah Nasir ad-Din, which expression he has in the following words: you Forestanian pantaloons, isn't it all the same to you whether you have a mule or a hare for your farm work? Haven't both of these animals 4 legs? These contemporary favorites of yours, of course, do not know and do not even suspect that these 2 independent divisions of the octave into whole notes, which they now have, and which they called the Chinese and the Greek, have as the basis of their arising 2 entirely different causes. The first, that is the Chinese division, is, as I already said, the result of the thorough cognizance by the great learned twin brothers, unprecedented on earth previously, as well as subsequently, of the law of Heptaparaparshinokh. And the second, that is the Greek division, was made only on the basis of what is called the restorials of voice, which were in the voices of the beings, Greeks, of that period, when this 5-tone Greek octave was composed. Almost as many of these restorials of the voice, or as they are still sometimes named, light sounds of voice, are formed among your favorites, and until today are still formed, as there are independent groups into which they are divided, and still continue to be divided. And this proceeds so because these light sounds of voice are in general formed among the beings from many outer as well as inner surrounding conditions, not depending on them themselves, as for instance, geographical, hereditary, religious, and even from the quality of nourishment and the quality of reciprocal influences, and so on and so forth. Your contemporary favorites, of course, cannot understand that however hard these same ancient Greeks tried, or to say however conscientious their attitude toward this matter, they could not with all their wish find in the division of the octave of sound into definite tones either more or less than these 5 whole notes, since the totality of all the conditions not depending on them, both inner and outer, gave them the possibility at the reproduction of their chanting to rely only on their 5 restorials of voice. Restorials, or gravity center sounds, in the voices of beings are in general, and are called those notes which, during the reproductions of different sounds by corresponding organs, the beings manifest according to the properties fixed in them, and depending on the general functioning of their presence, which properties, in their turn, are the result of heredity and of acquired faculties, freely, easily, and for a long time without evoking any tension whatsoever on the part of other separate functionings of theirs. That is to say, in other words, the restorials are obtained when the tempo of the result of such a manifestation of theirs fully harmonizes with other functionings of their common presence, the tempo of which is already fixed in them, thanks to all the inner and outer conditions of their common being existence. Thanks to the various conditions there of local character, and also to various assimilated hereditary qualities, various restorials of voice, or gravity center notes, are formed in beings of almost each group or of each geographical place, and hence the division of the octave into whole notes among beings who breed on each definite part of the surface of this planet of yours is quite different. At the present time, among your favorites, such groups exist as have the capacity to reproduce the gravity center notes in the octave of sounds, not only in 5 or 7 gravity center sounds, but even in 13 and 17 whole notes. To illustrate what I have just said, The beings of a certain smallish group might serve as a good example who dwell on the continent Asia, to whose singing I personally very much liked to listen, and who, in their physiological possibilities, although they had the data for the manifestation of only 3 ristorials, could nevertheless in their chanting reproduce up to 40 separate definite sounds. Their chanting was extremely delightful, and at the same time, however lustily they might sing, yet the calm and sustained reproductions of the vibrations of sound were obtained among them only on one or other of these 3 of their organic ristorials. This physiological particularity of theirs, namely, that whatever number of definite sounds they reproduced, the beings of this small group always obtained in the whole octave of their voice, only on these 3 ristorials, inherent in them, what is called the unchanging totality of vibrations, and that all during their manifestation, these ristorials have the property of evoking what is called centralization, and echo in the whole presence of a being. I made very clear to myself when, having become interested in their chanting, I began to investigate this particularity, rare among your contemporary favorites, with the aid of 3 special what are called their tuning forks, which I ordered, and with the aid of several very sensitive what are called vibrometers, which I possessed, and which were invented for me personally by my essence friend, Garnahur. In the Chinese division of the octave into whole notes, this being property was not at all taken into account. The basis of the Chinese subdivision of the octave into 7 whole notes, as well as the basis of all the information composing the totality of the special branch of knowledge relating to the law of ninefoldness, consisted of the results of those conscious labors and intentional sufferings of the 2 great twin brothers, for which their higher bodies became beatified, and who now dwell on that holy planet on which we recently had the happiness to be. However it might have been there, my boy, yet at the present time I regret very much that it will be impossible for me with the contemporary sound-producing instrument piano, which I brought from the surface of your planet, to explain fully to you the laws of vibrations of all sources, which actualize the common cosmic ensemble, as this was ideally possible to do on the remarkable law of Machovina, created by the follower of the great twin brothers, himself not less great, also a Chinese learned being, King Tuto's. On that remarkable elucidatory apparatus, law of Machovina, King Tuto's arranged and tuned, according to the corresponding calculations made by the great brothers, just as many strings for engendering vibrations as there are consecutive sources in the universe, from any planet up to the protocosmos, in the presences of which the vibrations of cosmic substances, changing according to law during the trogo-autoegocratic process, blend correspondingly for the actualization of everything further. However, my boy, although the sound-producing instrument piano, which I brought from the surface of your planet, is a very typical invention of your contemporary favorites, yet, owing to the fact, as I have already told you, that the fundamental tuning of the strings of its whole notes and half notes has not yet been changed, therefore, according to the consecutive blending vibrations evoked in a corresponding manner by the strings on it, it might still be possible experimentally to demonstrate at least the laws of vibrations issuing from any one fundamental common cosmic octave of substances. That is to say, issuing from one of the 7 fundamental totalities of sources. And thanks to this, it might be possible to represent to oneself and to cognize all the reciprocally acting vibrations issuing from all other sources, because, as I have already told you, all the variously scaled cosmoses, as well as the independent seventh parts of these cosmoses are almost exactly similar to the megalocosmos, and in each of them, the sevenfold sources of vibrations have the same reciprocal actions as proceed in the megalocosmos, and therefore, having understood the laws of vibrations for any one center of gravity, it is possible to understand approximately also the laws of vibrations for all centers of gravity, if, of course, their difference of scale is taken into account. I repeat, if the strings of this piano are tuned correctly, and the corresponding vibrations are evoked in corresponding strings, then the resulting blending of vibrations almost exactly coincides, even mathematically, with the law-conformable totality of vibrations of substances actualized by corresponding cosmic sources on the basis of the sacred Heptaparaparshinokh. On this piano, the vibrations of each whole note and half note of any octave pass from one to another exactly according to the law of the sacred Heptaparaparshinokh, and thus their vibrations, as this occurs always and everywhere in the universe exactly similarly, mutually help each other to evolve or involve. Here, by the way, it will be very interesting to notice that if the calculations and enumerations obtained by these great terrestrial learned beings were almost exact, then they owed it to the fact that the standard unit which they took for their calculations chanced to be that unit which is taken everywhere in the megalocosmos, that is, that same small particle of the most sacred substance, Theomermalgos, in which there might still be all the fullness of the power of vivifyingness proper to it. Well, just here I will explain to you, as I promised, about the already mentioned Nereonosian world sound. The Nereonosian world sound is just that sound, the vibrations of which have been taken from ancient times, and even at the present time there is still taken, it is true, for a very small number of your favorites, of course, of this same China, for their sound-producing instruments, as the absolute vibrations of the note Do. The history of the constatation of the existence there on your planet of this sound is as follows. It was first discovered by that learned member of the Society Akoldon, which existed on the continent Atlantis, who was a progenitor of these same learned twin brothers, and who, do you remember, I have already told you, chanced to meet the first settlers of the country Meroplacie, and was later elected by them as their chief. At that time, this same learned member of the Society Akoldon, during his observations of different cosmic phenomena, which proceeded on and beyond their planet, constated that in a definite locality of a certain part of this country, just near that locality where the town Gobe arose, twice a year, after certain meteorological perturbations in the atmosphere, the same definite sound always arose and was heard for a fairly long time. And therefore he then on the spot constructed an elevation such as he required, as is said there, for the observation of heavenly bodies. And he constructed this required elevation on this spot because he wished, during these observations of his, at the same time to observe and investigate also this cosmic result, at first entirely incomprehensible to him. And afterwards, when the two great brothers, the latter saints, constated and began to investigate the sacred cosmic law of Heptaparaparshinokh, as they already had knowledge of this cosmic result, they established themselves in the same place, and it is there that they succeeded in elucidating the character and the nature of this strange sound, which they made the unit of measurement of all their calculations in general. On this piano, vibrations of extraneous origin come through different shocks and tremblings, and for the greater part, from what are called aerial vibrations of inertia, which are generally formed in the atmospheric space by the natural vibrations already referred to. It is necessary at this point, in connection with the actualization of the fifth stoppander of the sacred Heptaparaparshinokh, to trace a parallel between two processes which externally have nothing in common with one another, namely, in the same manner as the first being food cannot acquire its vivifying power until after its transformation into being Piangiari. In the same manner, on this piano, the vibrations of a chord do not acquire a corresponding vivifying power until they have been fused with the preceding vibrations produced, starting from the center of gravity of the totality of the vibrations of the note soul. This last particularity of the sacred law of Heptaparaparshinokh is absolutely certain in this given case, that is to say, on the piano, but uniquely in consequence of the fact that if the vibrations of mi and ti are produced in a hermetically sealed room, these vibrations either cease instantaneously, or else the notes mi and ti, by reason of the momentum obtained from the first shock given for their arising, undergo involution and immediately cease. That is to say, as soon as the note mi reaches the note do, and the note ti, the lower fa. In conclusion of the explanations that I have already given you relating to the subdivision into 7 tones of the octave of sound which exists among your favorites, I must once again, alas, insist on this fact, that if anything has remained and reached them of this knowledge, they have forgotten everything that was essential, and always for the same reason, the disappearance from their presences of the practice of actualizing being park dog duty, the same disappearance which is the very cause of the gradual deterioration in them of the mentation proper to 3-brained beings. At this point in his recital, Beelzebub became absorbed once again in his own thoughts, and his look was fixed on the tip of his grandson's nose. There was a rather long silence, after which he said to the latter, my dear child, I must now speak to you willy-nilly about an experiment of which I was a witness on that same planet Earth, and which refers to the laws of vibrations. I shall, moreover, speak to you about it in all possible detail, for the 2 following reasons. The first is because I have already said much to you about this first fundamental sacred law of Heptaparaparshinokh. I would, therefore, be very distressed if for some reason or other you should not succeed in understanding clearly the particularities of this law. This is why I now find myself constrained to hide nothing from you concerning these experiments, because I am sure that they will enable you to form for yourself an exhaustive representation. And in the second place, I wish to impart to you all possible details concerning these experiments, because the terrestrial being who made them, thanks to the knowledge of cosmic vibrations which he had acquired, was the sole and unique being who, during the many centuries that I existed upon the earth, recognized and came to know my true nature,